Tonight, we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 31, looking at the whole chapter. It is the last chapter of the book of 1 Samuel. Originally, Samuel was all one book, but we took Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, which were all originally one book, and in a Christian Bible, not necessarily a Jewish Bible, Christian Bible, it's divided in basically part 1 and part 2, or Act 1 and Act 2. So we are coming to the end of Act 1 of 1 Samuel, kind of made me think this week. I was thinking about a book, because we're coming to the end of 1 Samuel, a book called Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. And just kind of funny because yesterday he came out with a big interview, releasing a brand new book. But Henry Cloud, doctor of clinical psychology from Biola University, famous author. Most of his counseling has actually been done with pastors. And the book Necessary Endings is something that is for everybody. Anybody can read it. But it has a unique kind of flavor in regards to pastors. And the idea is there are times in our life where something is coming to an end. It's necessary. It's going to happen. And how to determine if this is the right time to end something or not, whether the ending is necessary. And it's just that title. It's a book that I've bought for a lot of different people over the years. A great book. And I think of it when we get to 1 Samuel 31, because this chapter maybe should be called Unnecessary Endings, right? Unnecessary endings. It is coming to an end, and we will see what is happening here. But the reality is, it didn't have to happen this way. And yet, it did. As we read through it, this chapter is only 13 verses. It's very short. But there's 3 questions I have in mind. What happened? Why did it happen? And what was the outcome? Okay? So maybe have those in mind as we read it. Again, what are they? What happened? Why did it happen? And what was the outcome? This is what we read, starting at verse 1. Now, the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain at Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan and Abinadab and Malchi-Shua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men, on the same day. They all died together. And when the men of Israel, who were on the other side of the valley, and those beyond the Jordan, saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled. And the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen at Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth-shan. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his son from the wall of Bethshan. And they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted 7 days. That is the end of the book of 1 Samuel. Definitely ends as a tragedy as we look at this. But remember 3 questions. What happened? Why did it happen? And what was the outcome? When we look at it, first question, what happened? One word answer for each of these. Death. Death. It's just one of those things. We just flat out read these simple words. Thus, Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all his men. On the same day, they died together. Wow. That one sentence right there, just one verse out of the Bible, carries so much weight and tragedy. I appreciate Alistair Begg when he taught on this. He's focusing on that word, thus. And he said it's there specifically to make us stop and ponder. Thus. Because of everything that we've read before, this is what happened. And it comes to this place of a tragedy. In fact, it's such a tragedy that how many of you did go out and see the brand new David movie? The animated movie with the musical and stuff. Great movie. I keep telling people to go see it. If you haven't seen it yet and you're like, it's a kid's movie. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's a family movie, but it is really good. I know a man who is a very big and burly man, 6'2", all right? Very big man, works out all the time. He is an outdoorsman. When I see him a lot of times, I want to say, in the words of Tolkien, he is a ranger of the north. Right? He just looks like he should come straight out of Lord of the Rings or something. And he was telling me when he watched the movie, David, and it got to this scene, and Jonathan died, he actually started crying. He started crying because from reading 1 Samuel and studying it, and then watching it actually on a movie screen, he just loved Jonathan. Jonathan, he was a warrior, a man of valor. And if you go all the way back, we look at Jonathan, the son of Saul. Do you remember when we first saw him? All of the Israelites that were with Saul were scared. They were hiding. And the Philistines were against them. But it was Jonathan and his armor bearer that did what no one else would do. They went right up there and they said, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to walk right up to this narrow canyon that goes right up to this fortress, and we'll stand out there and wave. We're not going to sneak in. And if they say, hey, go away, we'll know that the Lord's not in it and stuff. But if they say, come up here, then we'll know the Lord is going to give them into our hand. And Jonathan steps out. He's like, hello. You uncircumcised Philistines, here I am, And they're like, hey, stay right there, or we're going to come get you. And what do? Jonathan and his armor bearer charge. And they instantly knock down a bunch of them. They wipe them out inside of the Philistine fortress. There's such chaos going on that the Israelites are like, what is happening? Someone says, Jonathan's gone. And they realize it's Jonathan up there. He took the fight to the enemy when nobody else would. A man of valor, right? It's Jonathan who at one point in time stands up to his father when Saul wants to kill David. He's already been sending assassins out. He's put the word out, not secretly just to his assassins, now to all of his men. Like, we're going to kill David. It's Jonathan that helps David escape. And when Saul and Jonathan have a confrontation over it, what happens? Saul is so angry that he throws a spear at his own son to try to kill him. But in this simple sentence, thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor bearer, and all of his men, all on the same day, in the same place, at the same time, together. They're dead. It's a tragedy. It's a scene of death. And really, when we look at 1 Samuel, it's something we see now for a third time. Samuel starts out in the book with a leader. Who was the leader at the beginning of the book? Eli. Eli, and what was he? The high priest. So we start with a leader at the very beginning who was a high priest. And what happens? He dies. He's leading the people, but then he dies. Why? Because he didn't confront the sin that was happening in the priesthood, specifically with his 2 sons, who were called worthless men. Throughout this whole teaching through Ruth and 1 Samuel, I've been pointing out, once again, you have the author using these different words. There are sometimes men who are worthless and wicked, and others that are men of honor and valor. And you see the dichotomy going on within the book. Eli had worthless sons, and because he wouldn't stop the sin that was taking place, they were judged, and he died. A very fat, blind, old man. And how did he die? When he got news that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken by the Philistines, he fell off his stool, off a wall, and broke his neck. Dead. Then we see the next leader of Israel. Who is it? Samuel. Samuel, a judge, but a prophet. And eventually, in 2 different chapters, by the end, we just see the simple words, and Samuel died. That's it. Very simply put, and Samuel died. He lived a better life than Eli. He followed the Lord. He served the Lord. And really, when you look at Samuel's life, it's not one of these stories in the Bible where you see him doing something wrong. He is following the Lord, seeking the Lord, serving him. But he too, the prophet, eventually died. So the high priest died, the prophet died, and now we have the first king of Israel. And what happens? Dead, right? And that's probably appropriate with that gesture because he ends up beheaded at the end of his life. It's something that all of us have in common unless the Lord returns soon. Hebrews 9, verse 27 says, "It is appointed for a man to die once, and after that comes judgment." Whoa! Davis, this is such an uplifting sermon, isn't it? It's such an uplifting chapter of the Bible. It's a tragedy of what we see happen. So what happened? Death. What was the second question? Why did it happen? One word answer: sin. Sin. And I'm not talking in large general terms. We could talk theologically, but specifically, why did things end this way for Saul? Sin. 1 Chronicles also has the story of Saul's death. And this is what the writer of 1 Chronicles said in chapter 10, verses 13 and 14. "So Saul died for his breach of faith, he broke faith with the Lord, and that he did not keep the command of the Lord, and also consulted a medium, seeking guidance. He did not seek guidance from the Lord. Therefore, the Lord put him to death and turned the kingdom over to David, the son of Jesse. That's a pretty stark warning right there. We don't read that in 1 Samuel. In 1 Samuel, the story of Saul is very stretched out, and we know it because we've been coming to Christ the King for the last several weeks and months, and we've heard it all, right? So we're able to understand that. In Chronicles, it's more compacted, and the author just puts it in there, and I think it's a good reminder. Why did all of this happen? Because he broke faith with God. He broke faith with God. It's a nice way of saying he sinned. He rebelled. He did not keep the command of the Lord. What was the command he first broke? He was supposed to go wipe out the Amalekites. Judgment against them from the Lord. And he didn't do it. And in that chapter, when Samuel confronts him and says, why did you break faith with the Lord? Why didn't you follow out the command? First, he lies. He says, I did. And then Samuel says, then why do I hear sheep? Right? You were supposed to wipe out all the livestock. Why am I hearing sheep then? And then what Saul says is, I was afraid of the people. I was afraid of the people. He was afraid of his own soldiers. That if he didn't allow them to take of all of these spoils, that they would turn on him. He was afraid that they wouldn't look up to him as a leader, that they would rebel against him. And so he feared people instead of fearing God. And then the second big one. He sought answers. And I love the way the writer of 1 Chronicles puts it. It isn't simply that he just went to the medium. It's that he didn't turn to the Lord. He sought answers from the medium instead of seeking them from the Lord. And if you remember, when we studied it, he didn't repent. The Lord wouldn't speak to him because there's a barrier in their relationship between them. And thus, he died. But here's the reality of sin. Our sin never affects just us. Unrepentant sin, and even sometimes repentant sin, has consequences that goes further than just affecting us, okay? When we look at it, maybe as an example, in the story, how did Saul actually die? He fell on his own sword, right? He commits suicide. And you get it and you understand it within this context, but it's interesting because years ago I was in a group talking with a bunch of pastors, and the topic of suicide came up. And I made this comment. I said, it is one of the most selfish things a person can do. And two of the other pastors in the room said, no, it's not. No, it's not. I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you can't look at it as it being selfish or being sinful because you don't understand the place where the person's mindset is at the time and what they're going through. And you have to understand the traumas that are in their life. And they were trying to justify it. My perspective is very different. Because when somebody does that, they're not thinking about the ramifications that tear apart their family all around them. They're not thinking that through. Years ago, my dad, he did a funeral for somebody. And it was a family where somebody had overdosed. And then somebody else in the family, because of their grief, took their own life. And then a third person in the family, because of the loss of two other family members, they also took their own life. And I was very proud of my father, because somebody in that family did not want him to speak up, but he did. And he got very bold at the funeral and looked at all of the family members and just said, this has to stop. It has to stop. Again, one family sin having an effect that causes death and causes death and causes death. Over and over and over again, brothers and sisters, our sin affects more than just ourselves. It affects those around us. It affects those around us. And Saul is a perfect case for that. Who died? Because of his lack of faith in the Lord. He died. All three of his sons died. His armor bearer died. All of the men that were around him that trusted him as their king, all died at the same place, on the same day, all at once. Awful, awful. Third question. What was the outcome? Well, let's recap. What happened? Sin. Death. Why did it happen? Sin. What was the outcome? A gospel. A gospel. Now, this is the point where those of you who come here and know me, you're like, ooh, okay, here's where Tim's going to take this, and all of a sudden he's going to somehow show us how this points directly to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yeah, I don't work the magic that well. What is a gospel? Good news. Good news. When we read this, was there good news here? Verses 9 and 10. So they cut off Saul's head, stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put Saul's armor in the temple of Ashtoreth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beth Shan. In 1 Chronicles 10, verse 10, there's another part added. They fastened Saul's head to the temple of Dagon. Whoa, wait a second. What just happened? What is good news? Good news is the proclamation of victory, okay? Now, in Hebrew that we're reading right here, that word good news isn't gospel. Gospel is Greek. So when you go to the New Testament, the word gospel that we talk about literally means good news. And what is it in context? It was used when a general conquered another army and won a battle, or used when a politician or a king came in and began to rule or reign, when they took control. It was called good news, all right? And what would happen is people would go out and they would speak of that good news throughout all the city and the region, all right? It's not unlike when we have elections, right? We have elections and there's two people running for the same position. Well, I mean, a lot of times there's more than two because there's all the little other parties, but they don't matter, right? So you have these two people running for the same position, and the night of the election, what are they doing? They are there at some big party area, and they have all their biggest donors, their family, their friends, and they're watching to see who is going to win, right? And when they get the news that you won, what happens? Oh, the party begins. A little song, a little dance, confetti, balloons, right? The party begins. And then you see it all over social media, all over the news. So-and-so won, this person won. And that would be the gospel of that person, the good news. Years ago, I remember being up late at night and all of a sudden there was a news flash. And on the news was President Barack Obama. And what was he announcing? That SEAL Team 6 had caught and killed Osama bin Laden. All right? What was that? It was a victory announcement. And I sat there watching for the next few hours all the news reports about it. And I was scratching my head at first because they kept showing, this is the middle of the night, college campuses all across the United States where college students were coming out and they were celebrating, throwing parties. And I was like, what is going on that they're celebrating this? And it dawned on me finally, with the age of these college students, with the year that happened, they were all young children when 9/11 happened. And they had grown up their entire life through grade school, junior high, high school, and now into college with a boogeyman. With a boogeyman, a villain, an enemy. And on that night, they heard good news. The person that we have been afraid of since we were children is now gone. And they celebrated that good news. That is what the Philistines are doing in this story. They're celebrating the way that people celebrated at that time in these cultures. And so, what do? They take Saul's armor, the armor of Saul. Remember earlier in 1 Samuel at the beginning, it was only Saul and Jonathan who had armor and weapons, actually, right? This is important. This is Saul's armor. And they stick it on the wall in the temple to Ashtoreth. Who is Ashtoreth? Fertility goddess. Here we are coming up on Valentine's Day, right? She would have been, if translated over, the mama of Cupid, okay? She would be like Venus or Aphrodite or something, right? In other mythologies. That's who she is. She's represented even, you'll see it today when people celebrate the maypole. That's where all of that comes from. Or in some places, I once saw some things about a temple that was in China with people going to pray to all of these phallic symbols. Why were they praying in front of phallic symbols? Because they thought if they did that and brought offerings, then they could have children, all right? That's Ashtoreth. And they hung his armor there. They took his head. And where did they put it? On the wall in the temple to Dagon. Where do we know that name from? Remember when the Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant? Where did they put it? In the temple of Dagon. And what happened the next morning? Dagon had fallen over, right? Poor Dagon. So they prop Dagon back up. They go back in the next morning. What happens? Dagon has fallen over and his head has been cut off. Now, where is Saul's head? In Dagon's temple. And his body hung on a wall of a city. Horrible. And the Philistines put out the good news. They celebrate their gospel. It's the gospel of the Philistines. We conquered the king of Israel. We conquered this upstart who thought he could take us on. Incredible. Sad. I do like the highlight of this whole story, and there is a highlight. Did you catch that there were certain people that came and took down the body? Right? Who were they? They were the people of Jabesh Gilead. Why did they do that? Well, we first read about them in chapter 11 of 1 Samuel. I'm going to read verses 5 and 6 and then jump to verse 9. This is what we read. Now, behold, Saul was coming from the field behind the oxen. This is when he had been coronated as king, but then just went home to farm, right? He hadn't done anything yet. And Saul said, "What is wrong with the people that they are weeping?" So they told him the news of the men of Jabesh. What was the news? That they were under siege by a foreign army, and the only way they could live is if they would cut out their right eye and become slaves to a foreign king, right? And the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. And what did Saul do? He rallied the men of Israel. He took the ox that he was out farming with, cut them up, sent all of the pieces to all of the different tribes of Israel, and said, "This is what's going to happen to any man who doesn't come and fight to save Jabesh Gilead." Whoa, right? Aren't you glad that that's not how we look for volunteers in our church, right? Wow. The men of Israel show up, and verse 9, "Thus shall you say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow, by the time the sun is hot, you shall have salvation." You shall have salvation. That's incredible. When you look at this, Saul saved these people at the beginning of his reign. He saved them. And now, decades later, when their king, their savior, is beheaded, body hanging on a wall, they show up. And I love the description in chapter 31, verse 11 to 13. When the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. They took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh and fasted for 7 days. I keep mentioning this thing of men of valor, men that are valiant, men of worth throughout this. But just as an example, what we see in this story right here, what do people of valor look like? What do they do? Well, here's an example. People of valor remember their past. They remembered the one who had saved them. They remembered. People of valor take risks in order to do the right thing. They literally risk their lives. The men of Jabesh Gilead, not all of them, just the ones who were valiant, men of valor, they traveled all night, went right up to the wall of a Philistine city, and they're like, "We're taking that down now." And they did it. They could have been wiped out. But they were willing to take a risk because it was the right thing to do. And people of valor, they show honor and respect when it needs to be shown. I love that picture. What did they do? They took the bones of Saul and Jonathan and Saul's other two sons. They burned them, and then they buried them under a tamarisk tree in their city. Why a tamarisk tree doesn't say, but it is curious that a few chapters earlier, the author of 1 Samuel points out that when Saul was on a campaign, he was sitting with his spear propped up, resting underneath a tamarisk tree. Who knows? Maybe it was Saul's favorite tree. Maybe that's what he was known for, and so they said, we're going to honor him this way. Men of valor. Incredible. I love that idea. People of valor. Valiant. Not worthless. Not wicked. Willing to take risks. Willing to remember. Willing to bring honor. Willing to go outside of a city wall to honor their Lord, their King, who died. A group of women of valor who went outside a city wall to a tomb at great risk, because they would have known there should have been a squad of soldiers there to honor their king. And instead, when they got there, the tomb was open. The body of their king was gone. Jesus was a prophet, a priest, and a king. And just like all of the prophets, priests, and kings before him, he died. You can imagine the gospel of Satan that went out on that weekend as they thought they killed the Son of God. But the Son of God was also the Son of Man, prophesied in Daniel, that would come from the right hand of the Father to earth. And the difference, he died, but he was sinless. So he broke the power of sin and death. We get to declare his gospel. We get to cry out, death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is the victory? Where, O death, is thy sting? Thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord, Jesus Christ.